So excited.
Will you protect me? I've been seeing this up. You make sure that they're that they don't forget good off.
Good evening, everyone. Is this? Can you hear me? Am I audible? Good evening. We're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Janine, Pollock, Chief of Special Collections at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And it's my unique and unusual pleasure to welcome you to the Kislak Center and the 17th Annual Lawrence J. Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscripts in the Digital Age. This year's theme, Circulations, has particular resonance for me as a public librarian. And it made me realize that I don't often share news about the library, the Free Library, and its operations. So I thought I might take a few moments to acknowledge some things that I have to be grateful for and what lovers of the library and our special collections can also be grateful for. What brings us here tonight instead of the Elkins Room or the Skyline Room at the Free Library is actually a good thing. Our HVAC system in the rare book department is receiving a long overdue overhaul, and the department will be closed through next May. And I want to acknowledge the hard work of Allison Fryermuth, who may be here. She may be arriving at some point, but just the head of the rare book department. They've been working very hard to protect the collections in preparation for the work that's going to be done in this major disruption. But this project represents only part of an investment that the city of Philadelphia has been making in the Free Library that has impacted special collections profoundly. With the increased budget outlay of the past couple of years, our staff has grown and we've been able to add several new librarian positions as well as an additional curator. We've received additional funding for our exhibitions program, and we've also been approved to seek proposals for a collection management system, another long overdue infrastructure item. So the state of rare books and special collections at the Free Library is solid, and we have the tools in place to fulfill our mission of accessibility and sharing. So I'd like to express my gratitude for this ongoing partnership with Penn Libraries, the Kislak Center, and the Digital Scriptorium. We're going to celebrate all of that tonight and these next couple days. But your commitment here at Penn to helping so many institutions keep their manuscripts circulating in the wider world has been transformational. And every year I look forward to this symposium where we get to experience the fruits of these labors via the scholarship to be presented over the next few days. So it is now my sincere pleasure to introduce Sean Quimby, Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts. I forgot. That's okay. The director. Say what your title is and we'll be all good.
Thank you, Janine. It's great to hear the good budgetary news about the Free Library, and thanks, of course, to the Free Library for its ongoing partnership. So yes, I am Sean Quimby. I'm the Associate Vice Provost and Director of the Kislak Center for Rare Books, Manuscripts, and Special Collections at Penn Libraries. And I am pleased to welcome you to this, the 17th Annual Lawrence J. Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscript Studies in the Digital Age. As Janine mentioned, our theme this year is circulations, the movement of texts through space and time from one reader to the next and so on. The movement and movableness of text is also the theme of our current exhibition in the Goldstein Gallery, which is in the far corner. You'll see it if you stay for the reception. And that's curated by Sims curator of digital humanities, Dot Porter. She'll be offering a tour tomorrow afternoon at 5 that I encourage you, even if you're in the Zoom audience, to attend, as we're going to have someone walk through with a smartphone. Circulation is the most fundamental job of any library, and yet this fact is too often belied by the language that we use to describe libraries, language that connotes inaction, of unread, forgotten tomes sitting on dusty shelves. Recent projects like Andy Stauffer's book Traces have called attention to the fact that even the least read books sitting in a university library stacks bear evidence of use, the hands and minds that they pass through, making each in their own way unique. But what about everything that happens to a text before it comes to rest at a library like the Kislak Center? In 1997, collector Larry Schoenberg set out to answer this question, to build a database that would track the historic and current locations and values of the world's manuscript books. Drawing on sales records and dealer catalogs, he and his wife Barbara compiled a huge corpus of data that became known as the Schoenberg Database of Manuscripts, or SDBM. I love the image that my colleague, Sims Curator of Programs Lynn Ransom, conjures in her history of how the SDBM came to be. Describing Larry's many hours of research at the Grolier Club, she writes, "He could frequently be found seated at a small desk in the stacks where he had a direct access to the catalogs that would satisfy his voracious appetite for more manuscript data." Thanks to that voracious appetite for manuscript data and to Larry and Barbara's perambulations to and from libraries around the world, we're now better able to understand the circulation of many thousands of pre-modern manuscripts. Still growing, the SDBM is also feeding new initiatives like the Cultivate Manuscripts project, about which we'll hear tomorrow. But the SDBM is just one of many projects to come out of the Schoenberg Institute as it pursues its mission to bring people, manuscripts, and modern technology together. Last year's symposium highlighted Basira, Books as Symbols in Renaissance Art, led by Nick Herman. This year marks the full implementation of the new digital scriptorium catalog, led by Lynn Ransom. And I'm happy to share that Dot Porter has been awarded a $350,000 NEH grant to continue the development of the online collation modeling tool, VC Editor. The team has accomplished these things while also publishing a scholarly journal. The new issue of Manuscript Studies hit our desks just today. And it is now open access, by the way, which has been a really great development. It's reaching more eyes than ever before. We also host research fellows and public programs and lead classes. All of these are a remarkable number of accomplishments for what is a comparatively small but highly collaborative team of scholars, librarians, and digital humanists. I'm going to wrap up my remarks this evening by saying that this gathering is evidence that Larry was not alone in his voracious appetite for manuscript data. In fact, he was rivaled, perhaps surpassed even by my predecessor here at Penn, my longtime friend and colleague, and the founding director of SIMS, Will Noel. As many of you know, Will died tragically last summer. Months later, after a lovely memorial service and the sharing of many fond memories, we are still struggling to come to terms with this loss. Will's own appetite for manuscript data, his passion for open access, his belief in the abilities of others, and what collaboration can make possible, all helped to make SIMS into what it is today. We'll feel his loss acutely these next 2 days, even as we commit ourselves to a future that he would be proud of. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Nick Herman, the Larry J. Schoenberg Curator of Manuscripts, who will introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Thank you again.
It's a true honor, but also a daunting task to introduce our keynote speaker for the 17th Annual Schoenberg Symposium, Dr. Lisa Fagin Davis. Lisa is widely celebrated in the field of manuscript studies and in many ways fulfills the cliche of needing no introduction. Her path-breaking scholarship on codicology and paleography of the European Middle Ages is widely admired, most distinctly in the form of a 2000 monograph on the Gottschalk antiphonal, an offshoot of her 1993 Yale dissertation, that considered this important early but dismembered choir book, whose travails indeed show the longue durée of circulation, which is our symposium theme this year. She's also the author of a more recent tome entitled La Chronique Anonyme Universelle, Reading and Writing History in 15th Century France, which provides a masterful translation and analysis of a complex corpus of roll format histories. She's likewise responsible for the important ongoing digital reconstruction of the Beauvais Missal using the fragmentarium.ms platform, for the widely read Manuscripts Road Trip blog, and with Melissa Conway for a crucial 2015 update to Seymour de Ricci's Census of Medieval and Renaissance Manuscripts in the United States and Canada, one of the most venerable resources for manuscript studies on this continent that has been given new life by her efforts. Her collaborative spirit is further exemplified by the role she played alongside Jeffrey Hamburger, William Stoneman, Anne-Marie Eze, and Nancy Netzer in organizing the landmark 2016 exhibition in Boston, Beyond Words, which brought to light the illuminated treasures of Boston's libraries, very much in the spirit of Philadelphia's own 2001 exhibition, Leaves of Gold. But perhaps more importantly, Lisa is universally respected as a voice for scholarly responsibility and open access, preached from her twin bully pulpits as professor at the Simmons School of Library and Information Sciences, and of course as the executive director of the Medieval Academy of America, one of the nation's most prestigious and venerable scholarly societies. The latter, the MAA, is a longstanding and highly visible, her post there is longstanding and highly visible, and she's held this post for over a decade, and she oversaw most notably the 2019 iteration of the Academy's annual conference, which many of you will remember was held right here at Penn and co-organized by our own Lynn Ransom and Yulia Verkolantsev. Lisa has been a lifelong friend of the Schoenberg Institute, and in truth, her association with Larry Schoenberg, Barbara Brisdell, and their incredible manuscripts dates back much further than the founding of the namesake institute here at Penn in 2013. So from Philadelphia and also from Florida, since the 1990s, Lisa had worked to produce an initial detailed catalog of the LJS manuscripts. Though never formally published, these detailed scholarly descriptions by Lisa, who with her first-class codicology and paleography skills was able to understand and give order to such a varied group of manuscripts, became the backbone for our present-day online catalog. Lisa's foundational work here demonstrates the bibliographic precept of meticulous study and good information begetting more of the same. And as manuscript scholars, we're lucky that she applied the same rigor to other marvelous cataloging work she's produced for manuscripts at Yale, at the Walters Art Museum, at the Boston Public Library, and elsewhere. Beyond academe, as a public scholar, Lisa is perhaps most closely associated with debunking and rationalizing myths surrounding the unreadable codex at the Beinecke Library, known as the Voynich manuscript. Indeed, her sometimes unwilling entanglement with this bugbear of cryptographic pseudoscience was recently the subject of a thrilling profile by Ariel Sabar in The Atlantic, and I strongly encourage all of you to read this, if only for the spot-on descriptions of Lisa as someone who, quote, has the air of the college roommate you could spend hours staring at the stars with, casually unraveling the meanings of the universe. Tonight, we're not quite expecting her to reveal the entire meaning of the universe. But we certainly look forward to hearing her thoughts on Manuscripts on the Move, exploring the digital ecosystem of manuscript studies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Fagin Davis.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me all right? Yes? Okay. Oh, good. Here we are. Excellent. Oh, Nick, that was really lovely. Thank you. That was really very kind. And thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to the Schoenberg Institute for the invitation. This really does feel like home to me. This is a very special place to me and in my life. So I want to talk tonight about, I'm going to talk about data. I'm going to talk about digital manuscripts and digital things. Data pertaining to and digital images of medieval manuscripts have been available online now for nearly 30 years in various formats, viewers, and applications. As with other forms of digital scholarship, the first decades of digital medieval manuscript studies have been a period of experimentation and development of best practices, with the evolving goals of reducing storage requirements, improving speed of access, reducing redundancy, improving sustainability, developing discoverable data models, and facilitating equitable access for the worldwide community of users. The recent development of interoperable and linked open data models have allowed for the establishment of a rich cloud-based infrastructure that allows students, educators, scholars, collectors, dealers, librarians, curators, and an interested public to dig deeper by following embedded links, easily form those links themselves, and use linked data to make important new discoveries. The Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies and the University of Pennsylvania Libraries have long been leaders in implementing these new and improved models, all of which serve as useful case studies in digital best practices. I want to start with a confession about an episode that was a painful but important learning experience for me. 20 years ago, don't worry, it's not that long a story, I was invited by Boston College Museum curator Nancy Netzer to take part in the planning of an exhibition at the McMullen Museum of Art that would contrast secular and sacred images in medieval manuscripts from the Boston Public Library and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. In particular, I was asked to take on the research and writing for this lengthy illuminated scroll that had lain unstudied and essentially unknown in special collection stacks at the Boston Public Library for more than a century, a universal chronicle and genealogy of humanity written in French around the year 1475. The anonymous text I christened the Chronique Anonyme Universelle is a fascinating compilation of historical and literary sources. My research for the exhibition raised more questions than it answered, and so I continued to study the Chronique even after the exhibition had closed. Over the course of my research, I identified 28 manuscripts of the Chronique, investigated its source material, and established the transmission tradition. A National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship for Independent Scholars allowed me to travel through Europe in 2007, studying the related scrolls in situ. Eventually, the project would result in a monograph, combining a full-scale critical edition and facing translation. There it is, thank you, Vanna White here. A detailed commentary on the source material and full descriptions of each of the identified manuscripts published by Breppels in 2014. In the midst of this and other projects, I attended the 2010 annual meeting of the Medieval Academy of America at Yale and heard Martin Foyce introduce his Digital Mappa project. Using the cotton map as a test case, Foyce was developing a powerful annotation tool that would allow him to identify and tag, geolocate, different locations on a high-resolution digital image of the cotton map, annotations that would then be made discoverable. That evening, I cornered Foyce at a reception on the mezzanine of the Meineke Book and Manuscript Library with a question. Could Digital Mappa be used with the Universal Chronicle scroll to create an annotated and discoverable digital resource? The answer was a resounding yes. So began a fruitful collaboration in which the Chronique Anonyme would serve as a test case for the original Digital Mappa framework. We selected a scroll in private hands, a choice that simplified imaging, access, and permissions. The collector funded high-resolution imaging of the scroll and development of the data model, supplementing major grants from the NEH. We had a working prototype by April 2011. By this time, my monograph was nearing publication. I reached out to my editor to discuss linking the online digital resource with the press's website for the monograph. The publisher wanted the Digital Chronique to be a password-protected, monetized resource. Foyce and I were quite opposed to this idea and were pushing for an open access solution. Lacking the digital infrastructure to support the resource online, however, we eventually agreed that the only viable option, I am embarrassed to admit, was to include the digital resource as a DVD tucked in the back of the book. And there it is. Thank you for my humiliation is now complete. In other words, where data goes to die. Windows 8.1. Windows 8.1. Can anybody even remember back that far? Compressing this massive online resource into a DVD led to a significant loss of functionality and compromised its long-term viability. The monograph was published in 2014, and the DVD was obsolete within 2 years. The data was trapped in an outdated and unsustainable framework. As one reviewer put it, the software is slow and glitchy, and users may find it simpler in the long run to use the book's printed index, but with practice and patience, the search tool becomes manageable, and the digital images make it easy both to scrutinize details of the manuscript and to experience the chronique in something much closer to its native state. The disc may prove especially helpful for teaching purposes at institutions that do not have scroll texts in their collections. That is, provided the user can make the DVD run at all. It bespeaks both the promise of digital resources and the frailty of the technology in which they are embedded. Parchment here again wins the technological day for durability. Although the operating system of my own computer was theoretically compatible with the disk software, hours of effort and extra software downloads yielded only frustration, and it literally took months to find a machine on which the disk would run. As time passes and the disk software becomes more obsolete, that problem will only grow worse, and it is to be hoped that the publisher finds a way to put the material online and maintain them, so that the vast amount of labor they represent and the information they provide will not be lost, unquote. Professor Marvin was not wrong. The decision to burn the data and its interface onto an unsustainable and closed format welded them together and doomed the resource to obsolescence. Enter the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which in 2016 began an NEH-funded collaboration with Foyce to develop Digital Mappa 2.0, a project that was to be developed with the commitment to open access and open data, for which the Schoenberg Institute is renowned. Once again, the digital chronique was to serve as one of several case studies. Some of the data from the first iteration had been lost and had to be recreated, but in spite of that delay, the new digital chronique launched on the Digital Mappa 2.0 platform here at SIMS in 2018. And here's a QR code if you want to explore it yourself. This online open access interoperable resource includes expanded functionalities such as keyword searching, color coding, IIIF support, and external linking. Thanks to the collaborative generosity of colleagues at the Schoenberg Institute and the University of Wisconsin, where Foyce is on the faculty, a project that seems to have hit insurmountable roadblocks in both the real world, monetization of resources, and the digital world, data inextricability and platform obsolescence, is now available online as a sustainable, open, and fully functional resource. Lesson number 1. In order to be sustainable, data must be able to exist independently from its framework, since frameworks will almost inevitably face obsolescence. Data, if freed from the constraints of its interface, can live on. Extracted data downloaded to your computer lives in what is known as a silo, a digital space that is isolated from the worldwide digital ecosystem. That can be an important protective strategy. Isolation keeps your data safe from the scary world of viruses and hackers. But siloing your data puts it at risk of damage or loss due to a crash or other breakdown of technology. Don't panic, this is just a screenshot. Something I know we have all experienced. In the early years of the development of digital infrastructures, by which I mean the early 2000s for most of us, the best practice was to store your data in multiple locations using different types of storage devices: magnetic tape, external drive, hard drive, thumb drive, CD-ROM, floppy disk. Everybody remember those, whether 3.5 or 5.25, and so on. And of course, today we can use shared drives like Dropbox and Google Drive to preserve and archive our data, or cloud-based digital archiving services such as Wikidata, Internet Archive, or GitHub, or the digital archiving procedure developed by Laura Morreale and Sean Gilsdorf. But what happens when your data changes, as it does? Then we face the ugly problem of version control. Which file is the right one? Can we be expected to continually refresh and update each version of each file in all of the silos in which we might have tucked it away? And if not, where do we find ourselves? Multiple versions of multiple files in multiple formats in multiple spaces. No one has time for that kind of chaos. The story of Digital Scriptorium is a useful case study in the journey from siloing to sustainability. We will hear much more about the new DS catalog from LP Colodangelo and Rose McCandless on Saturday, but I want to give you a little bit of the backstory to tee it up for them. Back in 1996, with funding from the Mellon Foundation, a group of manuscript scholars met at the Hill Monastic Manuscript Library in Minnesota, now the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, to discuss establishing and codifying electronic cataloging standards for medieval and Renaissance manuscripts. I was fortunate enough to have attended one of the 2 early meetings of the Electronic Access to Medieval Manuscripts project, or EAMS. Over several days, we discussed what standards for the electronic cataloging of medieval manuscripts could look like, debating in particular whether it might be appropriate to simply adopt the standard model for electronic cataloging of printed books, the machine-readable cataloging system, or MARC. My daughter is laughing, and you'll see why in a moment. I will add that the reason I couldn't attend the second meeting when this picture was taken is that I was 8 months pregnant with my son, who is in fact named Mark with a C. And I swear that is just a coincidence. That is a total coincidence. Many of you will recognize some of these faces.
Yeah.
Melissa Conway, blessed memory, Richard Rouse, Lillian Randall, Consuelo Dutschke, Hope Mayo, and others. Barbara Shaler was also in attendance. After several days of debate, the EAMS working group concluded that MARC was not the ideal format for the electronic cataloging of medieval manuscripts. Why not? Because MARC was developed for printed books, objects that by definition may exist in multiple, essentially identical copies. Let's dig a little deeper to understand why that is a problem. A Library of Congress established bibliographic record for a particular edition of a particular work records edition-specific data, author and title, of course, but also publisher, date, and place of publication, dimensions, the number of pages, and so on. For a particular printed edition, this information is going to be essentially the same from copy to copy, allowing local technical services librarians to simply import the Library of Congress record into their institution's library database. For example, here's a WorldCat record for a printed book of hours from 1501. We see the title, the dimensions, number of pages, and these are going to be essentially the same for every complete copy of this book. If your library were to acquire a copy of this edition, your technical services librarian need only visit the back end of the Library of Congress database to import this record into your local electronic catalog, known to librarians as an Online Public Access Catalog, or OPAC. We're going to get so many exciting new acronyms today. So if, instead of a printed book, your library acquires, say, a 13th century Parisian pocket Bible, the technical services librarian can't just import a Library of Congress MARC record for a Bible. The librarian would have to create a new local record specifically for that manuscript, because every manuscript is completely unique in terms of place and date of writing, dimensions, and the number of leaves, among other features. This effort defeats the replicative nature of MARC completely. MARC records, in many ways, are about replication, standardization, and precision. Medieval manuscripts, on the other hand, are unique, chaotic, and imprecise, which is, of course, why we love them. Some early MARC records that are still lurking around in WorldCat demonstrate the problems of casual MARC usage for medieval manuscripts. So here's a WorldCat record for a manuscript book of hours. I would love to see this manuscript because I have a passing interest in liturgy and images of St. Margaret in books of hours. But I cannot find its location and shelf mark by referring to this record. If we head down to the Find a Copy at a Library section of the record, where one would generally expect to find that location information, we discover 59 libraries holding copies of this manuscript. Now, you and I know that's impossible because the bibliographic data represents one unique object, not a printed book in multiple copies. From the front end, there is no easy way to determine which of all of these libraries actually owns this manuscript. This bizarre and basically useless record results from a well-meaning automated WorldCat function that searches local OPACs and aggregates records that the algorithm concludes represent copies of the same edition. All of these distinct local records for manuscript books of hours have been aggregated into a single record. For printed books, such aggregation represents an enormous savings of time and labor. For manuscripts, not so much. This record had one job to do, and it failed miserably. And so after debating these issues, the Eames Working Group concluded that MARC format, as it was structured in the 1990s, might not be the best way to catalog medieval manuscripts in a digital environment. The group came up with the idea of using a relational HTML database instead, in this case, by Access, developing a nested cataloging structure that allowed for multiple authors and titles, among other things. This format became the basis for Digital Scriptorium, the first multi-repository collection of digital images and catalog records for medieval manuscripts. Digital Scriptorium launched in 1997 with images and data from collections at UC Berkeley and Columbia. 25 years later, the resource had grown to include 76,000 images of more than 8,000 manuscripts from several dozen collections, including some of the largest collections in the country, such as Harvard, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania. The Access model had been replaced by WebGen, but the website, search engine, and data model had begun to show their age. In addition, by this time, with the help of Deborah Cashin, among others, the Library of Congress had developed standards for cataloging ancient, medieval, Renaissance, and early modern manuscripts that would eventually help make MARC essentially the default format for online cataloging of handwritten as well as printed books. As a result, usage of Digital Scriptorium and interest from institutions in joining the consortium were faltering. I am happy to report that a complete redesign of the interface, data model, and image service was betaed last year and has now been officially launched, providing discoverable access to records for more than 15,000 manuscripts from several dozen collections. I want to offer my congratulations to everyone involved in this important project. You'll hear much more about the new Digital Scriptorium catalog from LP and Rose on Saturday, but I want to focus now on why the original model had become problematic. One critical limitation of the original data model for Digital Scriptorium was that collections that had their own digital records, whether in MARC or a different format, were forced to duplicate the labor of cataloging by creating records in two formats in two places, MARC in their local OPAC and DS format in Digital Scriptorium. Over the years, this led to severe version control problems. When an institution updated a MARC record in their own OPAC, someone had to remember to go into Digital Scriptorium and update that record. Many collections didn't bother to update the Digital Scriptorium record, or on the other hand, a scholar might suggest updates to the DS record that were never reflected in the institutional OPAC. Multiple records for the same object might deliver vastly different descriptive data to users, with no way to easily determine which version was right. I don't want to give any spoilers, but suffice it to say that thanks to funding from the Institute for Museum and Library Services Digital Scriptorium has been restructured in accordance with a new model that solves that problem. It does so in part by implementing a concept known as linked open data, or another acronym, LOD. LOD is actually two things. Linked data, so data over here that is connected to data over there by active links that users can click on to navigate between data points or data sets, combined with open data, data that is openly accessible to all, as opposed to data that is siloed, paywalled, or password protected. There's a third term you need to know, which is structured data. Structured data is data that has been cleaned up to facilitate those LOD connections. Again, you'll hear more about this on Saturday, but suffice to say that the new Digital Scriptorium catalog takes advantage of linked open structured data to provide discoverable and cross-searched access to records describing thousands of manuscripts across dozens of repositories, many of which also provide images. Users can navigate from DS to other data sets known as authority files, another library term that just means standardized versions of names, places, and other terms, or make their way to institutional data and image repositories. This means that institutions need only manage one version of their manuscript records, the data on their own server, records that become part of the online DS catalog. The same principle holds for the new way that images are handled in the DS catalog. Previously, the DS servers at UC Berkeley stored and served all the DS images, even those that were also being served by institutional digital repositories. This meant that the Berkeley servers were overfull of DS images, an eventually untenable situation from Berkeley's perspective. In addition, images updated in one repository might not be updated in the other. The implementation of the International Image Interoperability Framework, another acronym, IIIF, solves this problem. The International Image Interoperability Framework is a way of presenting digital images in an online environment that allows them to be shared via a persistent URL instead of by downloading and uploading into a silo. The underlying code, called a manifest, includes metadata that travels with the image, metadata that can be updated and expanded by the serving institution at any time. If an online image is IIIF compliant, it can be manifested in a workspace known as a shared canvas, simply by pointing to the IIIF manifest URL. The image file and the associated metadata embedded in the manifest are drawn into the shared canvas when called for, rather than being physically stored there. An image can therefore be stored in one place while being used in multiple workspaces. In the new Digital Scriptorium catalog, IIIF solves the version control and storage problems, as the DS record can manifest institutional images in the shared canvas viewer when called for. That is, when a user opens the relevant record, instead of storing multiple copies of each image on multiple servers. It is very important to note that images will only appear in a DS record if the institution has chosen to make those images available via a IIIF server. This means that if a particular holding institution has not yet implemented IIIF service, images of their manuscripts will not manifest in the Digital Scriptorium viewer. For this reason, every DS record also includes a link back to the institutional record, where a user may be able to find images of the manuscript in question. In other words, whereas the original Digital Scriptorium was in many ways intended to be an image repository with some data, it is now a data service with some images. All of this means that, in the new DS catalog, manuscript repositories are responsible for their own data and image curation in their own digital repositories, which is how it should be. Data that flows into DS is enhanced and enriched in important ways, and DS records have their own unique identifiers. But the content of the descriptive data is in the hands of the holding institution and will not be altered by DS staff. There are a handful of exceptions. small collections without digital repositories who want to make their data and images available only in DS, and DS staff may also be able to provide limited descriptive metadata for small collections without access to someone who can describe their manuscripts for them. But for the vast majority of records, linked open data and IIIF models facilitate discovery and sustainability. I want to give an enormous shout out to 3 generations of DS governance, all of whom played critical parts in the development, stewardship, and redevelopment of digital scriptorium, the original, former, and current directors of DS, Consuelo Dutschke, Deborah Cashin, and Lynn Ransom. Thanks to their expertise, hard work, and leadership, and that of the various DS boards and the team here at SIMS, the new DS catalog is a model of ingenious redevelopment that provides unprecedented access to manuscript records in North American collections. Lesson number 2, linked open data helps to solve the version control problem by allowing multiple interfaces to access the same online data. Data need only be updated in one place before flowing into each instantiation, improving version control and long-term sustainability. Case study number 3. My first job out of grad school was right here on the 6th floor of the Penn Library, cataloging manuscripts. Although back in 1993, it was not Kislak, it was simply known as Special Collections. It was during this project that I first met Lawrence and Barbara Schoenberg. Larry was a first-class manuscript collector, amassing a spectacular collection of several hundred manuscripts, primarily focused on the history of science and technology, but also including important examples of liturgy and literature. Most of the Schoenberg collection now belongs to Penn, and in 2011, Larry and Barbara collaborated with Penn Libraries to establish the Schoenberg Institute of Manuscript Studies, which has brought us together today. Larry passed away in 2014, and I want to thank Barbara for her ongoing stewardship of Larry's important legacy. Now, back in 1993, all of this was just a twinkle in Larry's eye. When he began to work with the library on a 1994 exhibit of his collection, I was brought on to curate the show and help write the catalog. This led to my working directly for Larry for nearly a decade, studying and cataloging his collection. As a collector, Larry had a keen interest in the provenance of his collection. He was also a computer scientist, and when he began to collect and compile data about the previous sales of each manuscript he owned, who sold it, when and where was it sold, and for how much, it was only logical that he would begin by inputting that data into an Excel spreadsheet and eventually an Access database. He and Barbara then began to expand the data beyond their own collection to include thousands of manuscript sales, working with dealers and an army of grad students to track down sales catalogs and transcribe the data into their growing data set. In 2011, when the Schoenberg Institute was established, Larry and Barbara's data set became the kernel of the Schoenberg database of manuscripts. There we go. By the time it officially migrated to Penn, the database contained more than 163,000 records. Today, that number has grown to nearly 268,000. But like Digital Mappa and Digital Scriptorium, the database had been somewhat left behind by developments in data modeling. And a few years ago, the database got a much-needed redesign that brought it into compliance with sustainability best practices. Over the years, the data had become internally inconsistent, in part because the data had been input without a clear set of instructions governing the data structure. Different sales of a manuscript, say of the City of God, for example, might give the author as Saint Augustine of Hippo, or Augustinus, or Augustine, comma, Saint. If data is linked to structured authority files, that kind of inconsistency isn't a problem. But in the case of the Schoenberg database, those links hadn't been yet incorporated into the data, and so it could be extremely difficult for users to identify records that represented transactions involving the same manuscript. In order to use the data effectively, Users needed to be aware of exactly what the data was, the history of the data set's development, and how the data functioned. Without that background, some users found the database challenging and ineffective. In addition, it had become unclear what these records actually represented. Did a record of a sale of a manuscript by Sotheby's in 1918 represent the manuscript itself, or was it something else? By the mid-2010s, the database, which was a treasure trove of provenance information, had become frustrating for some users who were not versed in its history and development. With such an enormous legacy data set, the task of redesigning the database was huge and somewhat intimidating. Lynn Ransom, who is, among other things, the manager of the Schoenberg database, convened a brainstorming meeting in this very space in 2014 to consider how we might reimagine and restructure this data. It was Lynn and her equally brilliant Sims and Kislak colleagues who had the breakthrough realization that the records do not actually represent individual medieval manuscripts as objects. Each record actually represents an observation of an individual manuscript by a particular person at a particular place and time. This was a brilliant and extremely important revelation that informed all of the work we did over the next several years with funding from the NEH. With the understanding of what the data actually represented, the data model could be transformed in a way that makes the database an even more powerful tool for investigating provenance, owners, buyers, sellers, sales prices, codicological features, and more. The new Schoenberg database of manuscripts was betaed in 2015 and fully implemented in 2017. Lesson number 3. Think carefully about what your data is and what your data isn't. If you can answer that question with clarity and intent, you will be well on your way to crafting a successful data model. I've now introduced you to 3 SIMS-hosted resources that have recently been redesigned and relaunched in order to implement digital best practices, increase sustainability, and improve discoverability: Digital Mappa, Digital Scriptorium, and the Schoenberg Database of Manuscripts. The Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies has demonstrated again and again a deep understanding and commitment to digital best practices and open access. And as researchers and users of these resources, we should all be extremely grateful to the Sims and Kislak current and former staff for their efforts on behalf of us, the user community. All 3 projects have extractable data. All 3 use linked open data, and all 3 have been redesigned with careful thought in order to maximize discoverability and sustainability. So here's how that works in practice. Let's start with Digital Mappa and the Digital Chronique. So we're looking here, this is just a screen capture video because doing a live internet demo is way too stressful. So here's how this works. The original model used live links to allow users to navigate internally between DM resources within a single project. So for example, you could follow this annotation link that I'm about to highlight. There it is. So if you roll over, the annotation pops up, and you can click on that to see here the transcription and translation of the annotated paragraph. Then say you're really interested in Hugh Capet. You could follow this link to the index of individuals, and there you will see links to other appearances of Hugh Capet in the Chronique, as well as an authority file of my own making that provides information about him. But now that DM 2.0 allows the inclusion of external links, we can actually add links to external LOD authorities like Wikidata, which is what I've done here, where we can find established structured data, in this case about Hugh Capet. And then if we scroll down, we will find links to a whole host of other authorities. So now we're out in the cloud-based LOD ecosystem, and now we can start exploring. Okay, fine, but what about the images? So DM 2.0 has implemented IIIF support, meaning that PIs can use IIIF interoperability to pull comparative images into the resource from other IIIF servers. In this case, the copy of the chronique that started it all, the one held by the Boston Public Library, whose images are served by the Digital Commonwealth IIIF repository in Massachusetts. So if we zoom in a little bit, we can actually see they've actually stitched it together into one gigantic file. And then up here at the top, there's an annotation for the whole resource that is a link to Digital Commonwealth, so that we can actually then go out to the source record for this manuscript. And if we scroll down, among all of the descriptive metadata that is in this record, we find the names of two previous owners, Bertram, the Earl of Ashburnham, who many of you will have heard of, and Joseph Barrois. But these links are internal facets. Clicking on Ashburnham results in a group of Boston Public Library manuscripts that he also owned. So how do we get out of this kind of closed digital space and back into the linked open data universe? Well, the Boston Public Library is part of DS 2.0, of Digital Scriptorium. So we can go to Digital Scriptorium catalog and we can find the record for this manuscript. And we can see how the DS 2.0 instantiation has been enhanced and enriched by the Digital Scriptorium algorithm. So on the right there, under the links, there's a direct link back to Digital Commonwealth, but down here, there are facets that pull up all of the Digital Scriptorium records about him, but then there's also now a link to Wikidata. So if you click on that, that's going to take us out of Digital Scriptorium and back to Wikidata, where we can see more about him. And in fact, we find an authority for the Schoenberg database. If you click on that, now we're back at Penn in the Schoenberg database, where we can see all of the manuscripts in the Schoenberg database that were owned by Ashburnham. I see Laura laughing over there. And so now, we have to ask ourselves, is the BPL manuscript here? Well, let's find out. So we've got all of our Ashburnham records. Now we're going to cross-search that with the Boston Public Library's census records. And if we scroll down a bit, scrolling, there it is, the Généalogie de la Bible and Universal History in French, ending in 1380. That's the one. Okay, so now we can click on that, and now we see this data. But here we encounter one of the great innovations implemented with the redesign of the Schoenberg database, the distinction between an observation record, which that was, and a manuscript or MS record. The MS record serves as a hub, linking records that represent observations of the same manuscript. This record links three observations: the 1901 Sotheby's sale of the Ashburnham collection, the 1935 de Ricci census, and the 2022 Digital Commonwealth online record, where if we open that record, we find a link that takes us back to Digital Commonwealth, where it all started. Now, if you were my library science students, I would pull up an image of the Sotheby's description, the census entry, and the Digital Commonwealth record, and we would have a lively discussion about the development of cataloging and descriptive data standards over the course of the last 123 years. But time is short and wine awaits, so I will spare you that digression. Instead, let's review the merry romp that we just took. From Digital Mappa to Wikidata and Digital Commonwealth, from Digital Scriptorium back to Wikidata to the Schoenberg database and back to Digital Commonwealth. We could also have made our way from Digital Scriptorium directly to Digital Commonwealth. And this is not a closed system. Using other links in these resources, we could go almost anywhere. So I hope I have successfully demonstrated how this rich ecosystem of linked open data and interoperable images facilitates research and discovery. But there is one more important advantage to these linked and interoperable digital formats. When a book is published in print, it cannot truly represent the ultimate final word on a particular topic. Knowledge is always growing and changing, open to new interpretations, and impacted by new sources, methodologies, and discoveries. A printed book is, therefore, a snapshot of the state of research at a particular time as expressed by a particular person. That is valuable, of course, but like siloed data, it can quickly become outdated. This is what happened to my chronique monograph. Since the book was published in 2014, 6 new manuscript witnesses have appeared, either on the book market or identified in collections. Most of them are fragments of known copies, but 2 are whole and were previously unrecognized. I cannot update the printed book to incorporate these new witnesses, but a digital resource, if carefully designed with long-term sustainability in mind, can be updated almost indefinitely, with storage space as the only real limiting factor. One of the new witnesses is this fragment of a previously unknown copy of the Chronique, sold in 2022 and again just last month, when it was acquired by none other than the Kislak Center here at Penn. I was very excited when I heard that news. The fragment is not here yet. I'd hoped it would be, but it hasn't arrived yet. It's waiting on an export license. So I can't show it to you in real life. But once it has been imaged and cataloged in Penn's digital repository, it will make its way into Digital Scriptorium, Digital Mappa, and the Schoenberg database, joining the rich and growing digital ecosystem of manuscripts on the move. Thank you. There's time for questions or fights, if anyone.
We already did all that.
Deborah and I have been through it already. Any questions? Deborah.
One thing I wanted to mention.
Please.
That everybody can hear me. I found that out when I was an undergrad. Anyway, in the digital scriptorium record, the other thing that we implemented, I think will help keep track of manuscripts in this growing and very rich ecosystem that you described, is that we developed manuscript identifying numbers.
Yes,
So-
thank you. I meant to say
Yeah,
that.
so go-
Did I
what-
not say that?
I
meant
don't
to say
think,
that. Sorry.
So will you actually tell them about that?
Yeah, so this is really important. Thank you, Deborah. Maybe I didn't say that. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. So every manuscript every record, not the manuscript, every record in Digital Scriptorium has a DS number. So the manuscript has a shelf mark, obviously, but they also have unique identifiers that will stay with that, follow that object. If it changes shelf marks or it changes institutions or if something happens to it, the object now has a unique identifier associated with it. And that's really helpful, especially for manuscripts in North America, which they get deaccession, they have to be sold, they get bought, they move around. And you can't count on, just because a manuscript is somewhere today, that it's going to be there tomorrow. So those unique identifiers will be extremely useful going forward to help keep track of things.
Even to collocate fragments. you'll
Yes,
say,
yeah,
all these numbers are the same manuscript.
thank you.
The microphone is just so that people in the room can hear. We have microphones on the ceiling so the Zoom audience can hear. But
Thank you for that very rich and mesmerizing presentation. I just wonder, this is when things work. And I was curious about, it's not so much when things don't work, but private ownership, resistance to participation, providing access to things that people don't want to share.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about ways of engaging private owners and the larger world of inaccessible manuscripts that are not in institutions,
Yeah.
and even in institutions that aren't committed to this particular way of doing things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Larry, God bless him, and may he rest in peace, he was really a champion of that access. Anyone, he would invite you to his home to look at a manuscript. He would loan it. He would, he wanted people to know about his collection. He wanted to share his collection. And many private collectors don't do that, right? They're worried about protecting, they're worried about security, they're worried about protecting the value of the object, so they want to keep it secret. But as those of you in the book business know, the more you know about something, sometimes the more valuable it is, right? So it can actually be really beneficial to put it out there. But there are collections that are not on board the open access train, and it's leaving the station, and it's a philosophy, and it's a lifestyle, the open access lifestyle. There's not a lot you can do other than just encouraging and saying, look, think about what you could do if you just make this material available, And, and this was something that Will was really an early champion of open access. And, I think his example inspired all of us, me, absolutely. And I think many of us. And Penn and Kislak and Sims has this platform and a bullhorn, and it sets and is a role model for that. And I think now that Digital Scriptorium is deeply committed to that model, I think we're going to see more collections. Now the barrier to entry is lower. It's less burdensome to be part of this open access infrastructure. So I think if we keep spreading that word and we keep pushing that message, that we're going to find more and more collections who are interested in making their material available, I hope. But I'm an optimist.
We have a question in the back here.
Thank you for the really interesting talk. One thing that I kind of noticed in your talk is this tension between databases and monographs or academic output that we are still kind of required to produce as academics.
Yeah.
And even though obviously you're absolutely right that attaching a DVD at the back of a book is not the way to go anymore, I think that effort in keeping the book in the ecosystem of data is still admirable. So I want to ask you, should we just give up on paper books?
No, that was definitely not my point. Absolutely not. No. I would never say that.
Rhetorical question then. And how are we going to be able to incorporate the kind of research work, especially monographs, and put them into the kind of wonderful ecosystem of discoverable manuscripts that you discussed, and especially I'm imagining an ideal scenario where you're reading a book and then the manuscript that is discussed in the book is automatically somehow linked to the database.
That happens, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
for
just
sure.
wanted to hear more about
Especially
that.
with persistent URLs, DOIs, you can absolutely, if you're reading a book online, you can have live links there that, you do that in manuscript studies in the journal all the time. I would never, I hope I did not give the impression that the book is dead, because I would never say that, ever. But the point I was making about my own book and others is that a book, you have to understand what a book is, right? It's like with the Schoenberg data. But, it is an observation. That's where I was in 2014 in my thinking about that object. And that's fine, that's what that is, and that's great, and I'm very proud of it. But there's always gonna be more, right? And so there's always space for books. Now here the question you're asking is sort of about open access publishing, which, so I have to switch to my Medieval Academy hat. And open access publishing, the models are still developing and still in their infancy in thinking about how we can afford to do that. How can we afford to have books be free? That is a really difficult question, and nobody knows the answer yet. Somebody has to pay, right? Somebody's got to pay for it because there's labor involved in publishing a book. Somebody's setting it, somebody's editing it, there's people printing it, someone makes the paper. There's human labor behind a printed book, and that labor needs to be compensated. And so there's always a question of who's going to pay for it? Is it the publisher? Is it the author? Is it the user, the end user? Is it a grant? Everyone is still figuring that out. And I'm not sure we will ever 100% be there. But we're getting there more and more. I think we will get there eventually, but we're not there yet.
We have a couple of questions in the room, but we have one in Zoom, so I'm going to pass
okay.
the microphone to Dot.
Oh, who's asking?
Thank you. So this is a question from Karen Reeds.
Okay.
Karen, I know she's working with me on a project we're doing with a bunch of people on LJS 419, which is that fantastic 15th century herbal. And so she says she has gratitude to Larry Schoenberg for bringing LJS 419 here so she could see it. But she does have a question for you. I'm getting there. How did being an independent scholar during your journey influence your approach to manuscripts, DS, and DM? Thanks for a wonderful talk.
So yes, as you've probably noticed, my career trajectory is very unusual. And when I finished my PhD, it was my husband starting to go to grad school. So we left New Haven, we moved to Philly, and he went to Wharton. And I just I wrote a letter to the curator here at the time and said, here I am, I have skills. What can I do for you? And he said, great, come on in and catalog some manuscripts. And so because I was never on a faculty, I've never had a full-time faculty position. I've taught adjunct, which I like, but I've never been on the job market. I've never, tried to get tenure. That's just never been my trajectory. And so I've really focused on manuscripts as objects. And I think that is really what has influenced the way that I think about my work, is that I'm really interested in not just the materiality of manuscripts, but because my work has always been in North American collections, I continue to be really interested in why are they here? How did they get here? Why are there medieval manuscripts in Iowa, and how did they get there? And those are the questions that I really want to answer, because those stories are really, really interesting. And those are the human stories behind these objects. So it's not just about the object, it's about the journey through space and time, I guess. And that's really what interests me.
Thank you for a really terrific talk. To go back to the previous question about integrating books, and then you mentioned wearing your Medieval Academy hat. Has there been any discussion either through DS or the Medieval Academy of possibly sort of creating a best practice of keying book indexes to the DS manuscript numbers? In other words, I've actually done this not to the DS, but to the Syriac URIs in my own 2 books. And each time the publisher was like, we'll let you do this, but we think it's weird. Can't you just put their name and the page number? And I said, no, I want to put the URI for the entity.
Wow, good for you. Good job.
Would that be something, if this were put forward as a best practice, then suddenly every book would be keyed to these unique identifiers for manuscripts?
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. So, part of the issue is that a lot of these standards and open access, IIIF, are kind of grassroots developments, like from the ground up. They're not being imposed from the sort of up there administrative infrastructure like the Library of Congress. If the Library of Congress said to do it, it would happen, right? You know, they've got the bully pulpit. I agree with you that it would be, it should be best practices. And generally those kind of things develop by peer pressure, you know, by sort of scholars taking the lead and saying, well, you know, you really should do this. I mean, for DS, because not every manuscript is in DS, it's a little trickier. Eventually, we hope that DS will be, you know, the complete union catalog of pre-modern manuscripts in North American collections. That would be amazing. And when that happens, and if we can say that the majority of manuscripts actually have a DS ID number, that would be really cool. There is an international project called ISMI, the International, what does it stand for? Standard Manuscript Identifier, right? Yes, ISMI. That is trying to do that, to come up with a system where every manuscript could have a unique identifier that would travel with it, but it's hard to get everybody to agree on what the parameters are and what they should look like and how many digits should it have and should there be a leading zero and things like that. So we're not quite there yet, but I agree with you that it should be best practices, and it's great that you're doing it. You're setting you're a great role model.
I think we had a question in the front
I
here.
saw you had your hand up, Herb. Did you want to ask something?
So we had a question about printed books, and you mentioned something called a floppy disk. And my question, so I'm going to mention something I think you've never even heard of, called microfiche.
I love microfiche.
So microfiche, so Oleg Grabar and I, in the 90s, I think, or 80s, had a project and a publisher, University of Chicago Press, to produce books using microfiche. And even 30 years ago, I had to spend a day trying to locate a microfiche reader. So these are fossils. And my question is, you showed us a hard disk, etc. Is anyone doing anything about these materials in these archaic media, microfiche discs, etc.? I recently needed a picture of a manuscript, a Menologian in Alexandria. I had to go to Nancy Shevchenko, who had done a volume of the microfiche publication, who knows about the library in Alexandria right now. To get a color reproduction, she had to go through her old slide collection, which was used for the microfiche. So there's a lot of valuable material.
You bet.
That's frozen.
Yeah. So there are, there definitely are places like the New England Document Conservation Center is one example, up in northern Massachusetts somewhere, where they have all of those readers in like every one you could imagine, specifically so that people can digitize them, people can access them, they can do things with them. So that it is possible. You just have to find, the right person.
Materials that
What's that?
Here, they're on the first floor.
There you go, first floor here at Penn. But no, I think you're right that we don't want to pretend that these things never existed and we need to be able to access them. But there certainly are places where you can access them.
They should be made accessible.
Yeah, no, I agree
generally.
with you.
That's
Yeah.
my question.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Not where to find a microfiche reader,
Right.
but
But
how to
actually
get this stuff
working with the
online.
thing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the BNF has done some of that work. There are definitely people who are digitizing those older formats and making them available. On Gallica, I think there's a lot of
And
that.
when are you
for sure.
going to get the
Yeah.
British Library back on?
Well, that's coming. It's coming. The British Library, we didn't even talk about the British Library. All right, thank you all very, very much. I'm gonna hand it back to Nick.
So we'll adjourn for we have a wonderful reception, courtesy of the Free Library, and also a display of manuscripts, some of which were mentioned today in the Lee Library, and that'll be up as well tomorrow. So please go to one or the other, no food or drink, of course, in the Lee Library, and we'll reconvene tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think that used to be Project Guide.